Good evening and welcome to Fireside Fairy Tales. My name is Rory, and if you've never been here before, well, what we do here on Tuesday nights is we listen to old folk tales and fairy tales from the past, I guess. The theme tonight is Norwegian folk tales. If you've never been here before, it's going to be me reading some tales that have been translated and collected over a few centuries ago, and they are traditional folklore. If you've never really encountered folklore, it is a bit distinct from fairy tales, so you can expect something weirder and a bit more adult, although tonight's aren't too extreme. And if you have never been here before, down in the description below, there will be timestamps. So if you want to jump ahead, I'm going to have a little preamble here, but if you don't want any of that and you want to jump ahead, you can go ahead and jump right ahead to whatever story interests you. We're going to be reading two stories tonight. The one that the icon and the title concern themselves with, the one that Disney has taken inspiration from at least, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Is the one called Farmer Weatherbeard. So if that's the story you want to get to, you can hit the timestamp for that if you're not watching it live. If you are watching it live, feel free to join in on the chat, the live chat. Give me your thoughts and interests in parts of the stories that you like and your own interpretations. I'm always interested in seeing those. You can also do that in the comments later if you want. But other than that, tonight we're going to be reading some Norwegian folktales, and they are ones that have been translated by Simon Roy Hughes, who is a contemporary of us. In other words, he's alive. He is translating the collected works of Asbjørnsen and Moe, and Asbjørnsen and Moe are kind of the Norwegian Grimm brothers. That's not a fair way to put it, but I think that's the best context for most people, which means that they went and collected folk tales from the countryside in Norwegian, obviously. Now, they have been translated over the years, but Simon Roy Hughes has put himself to the task of doing more definitive translations of it. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of translation, but Simon Roy Hughes has a Patreon for that goal of translating all of Asbjørnsen and Moe's works into English. I will include that link to the Patreon down in the comments below. If you're not watching this live, it'll be a pinned comment. Although, you can also, if you cannot afford to support him on his Patreon, you can also follow along on his blog, where he regularly posts up translated tales, not just from Asbjørnsen and Moe, but all sort of Norwegian and Nordic tales. So that's what we're doing. We're doing some live folklore. And I'm going to go on to the topics at hand today, a little bit of context on the stories and the idea of sort of Disney taking stuff and put a bit more context on it so that I don't come off the wrong way here. But other than that is what the show is. Good evening, GS. GS says sounds action-packed. The second story is more romantic and emotional and tragic. So in the title, if I haven't changed it or anything, I mentioned that Disney took the scenario that is going to be in the first story, Farmer Weatherbeard, from Four Sword in the Stone. Now, the person who has informed me of that was Simon Roy Hughes. He recommended this story when I asked him about stories about transformation. And I have no reason to doubt him on that as being an inspiration. As Bjornson and Moe are not small time, there's definitely would have been tales that they would have heard, the people that were writing in that time. But I do want to frame a bit, because I know that if I put up a video that says Disney took something, there's a couple of things that baggage that comes with that I want to shed myself of. The main thing is, taking from folklore isn't a bad thing. It's kind of the point. But it can take bad forms, I guess I should say. And I think there are two ways that issues arise when people take stuff from folklore. The first is not really one that'll be relevant tonight, but is worth mentioning, which is when they take it from another culture that is traditionally unrepresented or not credited for their contributions, and then they just refuse to acknowledge they took it from that, which there's a very interesting article about Beatrix Potter that I put up on my Mastodon account that I would encourage people to read, which makes the case that, well, Beatrix may have been a little bit guilty of that. That's not a good thing. That's just a credit your sources moment so that people know how different cultures have contributed to folk traditions. The second thing, though, Disney is a bit guilty of, and that is when they take from traditions of folklore, which, again, is a fine thing to do, but then they lock the door behind them, which Disney's kind of infamous for doing. They take these traditional tales, they tell them, and then they start trying to find, how far can we take it to lock other people out from using this stuff? Usually with copyright. And I won't go into all of it here. I literally wrote an essay about this. I just have never put it up anywhere, about the problem with copyright around narrative. But Disney is definitely guilty of doing that. So I do want to say those are kind of the bad versions of things. But Disney taking an idea from Nordic folklore and putting it into a children's animated movie like Sword in the Stone is in and of itself the point. That's what you want. You want folklore that adapts over time. And what I'm trying to say here is we don't need gatekeepers on folklore. We don't need traditionalists who say, well, that wasn't the original tale. There is no original tale. The collections of Bjornson and Moe and the Grimm brothers represent sort of a cross-section of a countryside that traded around a story that ever developed over millennia. They're not definitive. There's no definitive. This isn't single author stuff. This is community, cultural threads, narratives. But I will emphasize again, don't lock the door behind you, Disney. And acknowledge your source materials so that people understand the full breadth of how cultures interact. Now, another thing, there is no shocking or violent content tonight. I would say tonight's stories are relatively kid-friendly if you want to have them watch it. However, as a heads up, the second story is emotionally heavy. It is, I think, one of my favorite stories I've ever read. It is a beautiful story, and I do encourage you, if you're in the right place, to listen to it. But it is more emotionally realized than folklore normally is. So, and that's because, well, it is a folk story. It is rendered by Regine Normann, who we've read here before. And she sort of takes those stories she knew, but tells them in a more single author tradition that is a little more vivid on the emotional life of its character. So just a heads up, it's on the heavier side emotionally. With all of that said, pardon me, it's going to be a tickly nose night. I'm going to have a drink of water and we will get to our stories. Now, the The second story also will involve some ocean sounds, and last time YouTube compression didn't like that, so I'm hoping that won't happen. But the first story doesn't. All right, let's do just some light rain. Take down the fire a little bit. I like some lightning. Our first story tonight is a translation by Simon Roy Hughes, whose Patreon is in the pinned comment below, and you should support, because he's doing excellent work. It comes from a collection by Asbjornsen and Moe, and it is a Norwegian folktale called Farmer Weatherbeard. There was once upon a time a husband and wife who had only one son, and he was called Hans. The wife thought he should go out to work and said to her husband that he should go with him. "You shall do so well by him for me that he becomes the master of all masters," she said, and then she put some food and a roll of tobacco in a sack for them. Well, they were with many masters, and all of them said they could make the boy as good as themselves. But better they could not make him. When the man came home to his wife with that reply, she said, "Well, I do not mind what you make of the boy, but this I say, that you do so well by him for me, that he becomes the master of all masters." And then she put some food and a roll of tobacco in his sack again, and the man and his son had to go off again. When they had walked away, they came to a glacier where they met one who came driving with a black horse. "Where are you going?" he said. I was to go out and bind my son into an apprenticeship, the one who is able to teach him, for my wife comes from such good folk that she will have him taught to be a master of all masters," said the man. "You have met well," said he who drove that black horse, "for that is what I am fellow enough for, and such an apprentice do I travel for. Stand here behind me," he said to the boy. Then they set up off through the air. No, wait a little," cried the boy's father. "I would like to know what you are called and where you live," he said. "Oh, I am at home both north and south and east and west, and Farmer Weatherbeard am I called," said the master. "In 1 year you can come back, and I shall tell you whether he has grown so good," he said, and then off they went, and gone were they. When the year had passed, the man came to hear of his son. "It is just not done to be fully apprenticed in only 1 year," said the master. "Now he has learned to walk alongside the stools." Well, they agreed that Farmer Weatherbeard should have him a year more, and teach him fully, and then should the man come back. When the year was done, they met in the same place again. "Has he now completed the apprenticeship?" asked the father. "Now he is my master, and you will never see him again," said Farmer Weatherbeard, before the man really sensed what had become of them. They were both gone, both Farmer Weatherbeard and the boy. When the man came home, his wife asked if their son would not be coming, or what had become of him. "Oh, God knows what has become of him," said the man. "They went into the air," and then he told her how things had gone. But when the wife heard that her husband did not know where their boy was, then she sent him on his way again. "You shall fetch the boy, even if you have to go to old Eric himself." Note here, old Eric is a sort of slang term for the devil. She said, and she gave the man a sack of food and a roll of tobacco again. When he had walked a distance and come to a great forest, it lasted all day as far as he walked, but when it grew dark he saw a great light, and so he walked towards it. And after a long, long time he came to a small cabin close by a mountain, and outside it stood a woman, drawing water from a well with her nose, so long as it was. "Good evening, mother," said the man. "Good evening to you," said the wife. "No one has called me mother in 100 years," she said. "May I stay here tonight?" said the man. "No," said the woman. I don't know why, that makes me laugh. But then the man took out his roll of tobacco, burned a little, and gave some snuff to the wife. So glad was she that she began to dance. And so the man would be allowed to stay there for the night. Just like that, he asked after Farmer Weatherbeard. She knew nothing of him, she said, but she ruled over all 4-footed animals. Perhaps some of them would know of him. So she blew them together with a whistle she had, and asked them, but there was none of those little 4-legged animals that knew of a Farmer Weatherbeard. "Oh, we are 3 sisters," said the woman. "Perhaps one of the other 2 knows where he is to be found. You shall borrow a ride from me, so that you arrive there this evening, but it is 300 leagues by the shortest route." And so the man traveled, and he made it in the evening, and when he arrived, the woman stood, also drawing water from a well, with her long nose. "Good evening, mother." I think I got a little bit of Obi-Wan in there. "Hello there." "Good evening to you," said the woman. "Now no one has called me mother in 100 years. "May I stay here tonight?" said the man. "No," said the woman. But then the man took out his roll of tobacco, burned a little, and gave the woman some snuff on the back of her hand. Then she was so glad that she began to dance. And then the man would be allowed to stay there, just for the night. But just like that, he asked after Farmer Weatherbeard, and no, she didn't know anything of anyone by such a name. But she ruled over all the fish, she said, and perhaps some of them would know. But there was none that knew anything of a Farmer Weatherbeard. "Well, I have one more sister," said the woman. "Perhaps she may know something of him. She lives 600 leagues from here, but you shall have a ride from me, so you will arrive there this evening." Well, the man traveled, and he arrived in the evening where the woman stood, raking the fire. And she did so with her very long nose. "Good evening, mother," said the man. "Good evening to you," said the woman. "Now no one has called me mother in 100 years," she said. "May I stay here for the night?" said the man. "No," said the woman. But then the man took out his roll of tobacco, and burned some, and gave the woman the whole of the back of her hand covered in snuff. Then she was so glad she began to dance. And then the man was allowed to stay there for the night. Just like that, he asked about the farmer Weatherbeard. Well, she knew nothing of him, she said, but she ruled over all the birds and blew them together with her whistle. When she had heard with all of them, she missed the eagle. But a little while after it came, and when she asked it, well, it said that it had just come from Farmer Weatherbeard's. Then the woman said that it should take the man there, but the eagle would have something to eat first, and then it would rest until the second day, for it was so tired after the long journey that it could hardly take off from the ground. So when it was well fed and rested, the woman plucked a feather out of its tail and put the man in its stead. And then the eagle flew off with him. But they did not arrive at Farmer Weatherbeard's before midnight. And when they arrived, then the eagle said, "There are bones in carrion before the door, but you must not mind. Those who are inside sleep so soundly that they cannot be woken. But you are to go straight to the drawer in the table and take 3 pieces of bread. If you hear one snore, then pluck 3 feathers from his head. He will not wake from it." And there is a picture. That's a little sketchy, but there's a picture of him pulling an event yet to happen in the story. I'm just going to let you guys look at it for a moment. And then we'll move on. So the man did so. And when he got through the When he got the 3 pieces of bread, he plucked the first one's feather. Cried Farmer Weatherbeard. Then he plucked another. And then he cried again. But when he plucked the third, Farmer Weatherbeard cried so that the man thought the foundations and walls would collapse. But yet the farmer slept just as soundly. Then the eagle told him how he should behave later. And that he did. He went to the door of the barn, and there he stumbled against a boulder. This he picked up, and beneath it lay 3 wooden splinters. These he also picked up, and then he knocked on the door of the barn, and it opened immediately. He let go of the 3 pieces of bread, and a hare came out and ate them. He took that hare. The eagle bade him then to pluck 3 feathers from its tail and put the hare, the stone, and the splinters and himself in their stead from the tail of the large eagle. And then it would take them home. When the eagle had flown a long way, it alighted on a stone. "Do you see anything?" it asked. "Yes, I see a flock of crows flying after us," said the man. "We shall travel a distance more, we shall," said the eagle, and set off. And after a while it asked, "Do you see anything now?" "Yes, I see the crows close by us," said the man. "Drop the 3 feathers you plucked from his head," said the eagle. And when the man did so, and as soon as he dropped them, the feathers turned into a flock of ravens that chased those crows home again. By the way, if you're not familiar with the distinctions on birds, ravens are quite a bit larger than crows. Then the eagle flew far away with the man. Finally, it alighted atop a stone to rest. "Do you see anything?" it said. "I am not certain of it," said the man, "but I think I see something coming far away." "We shall travel a distance more, then," said the eagle. "Do you see anything now?" it said after a while. "Yes, now he is close by us," said the man. "You shall drop the splinters that you took from beneath the granite stone by the door of the barn," said the eagle. Well, the man did so, and as soon as he had dropped them, they grew up into a great, dense forest, so that Farmer Weatherbeard had to travel home for axes so he could chop his way through. And then the eagle flew far away again. But it grew weary, so that it alighted on a pine tree. Again it asked, "Do you see anything?" "Yes, I am certain," said the man, "but I think I can glimpse something far away." "Then we shall travel a distance more," said the eagle, and so it set off. "Do you see anything now?" it asked, after a while. "Yes, now he is close by us," said the man. "You shall drop the boulder you took from before the door of the barn," said the eagle. And that is the source of the icon, by the way. It's a little hard to read at this size. I can't zoom in, unfortunately, but there is a great beast down in the corner, trapped by a stone. But if you look at this tale on the blog, you can get a better look at all of these pictures. The man did so, and it became a great, tall stone mountain that Farmer Weatherbeard had to break himself through first. But when he had come to the middle of the mountain, he broke one of his legs, and so he had to go home and tend to it. But while that happened, the eagle flew home to the man, both with him and the hare, and when they had come home, the man went into the churchyard and put Christian soil on it, so that it became again Hans, his son. And when they came to the mark, the boy turned himself into a buckskin horse and asked his father to travel the mark with him. "When you have come to one who will buy me, you shall say that you want $100 for me. But you must not forget to take off the bridle, else I will never escape Farmer Weatherbeard, for it is he who will come to trade," he said. So it went too. There came a horse trader who had a great mind to buy his horse, and the man got $100. But when the deal was done, and Hans' father had got the money, the horse trader said he would have the bridle. "No, that is not a part of the agreement," said the man, "so you cannot have the bridle, for I have more horses and I want to take to town." And so each went on his way, but they had not come far before Hans turned himself into himself, and when he had come home, he was sitting on the bench by the stove. The second day, however, he turned himself into a brown horse, fine in stature, and said to his father that he should travel the mark with him. "When one who will buy me comes, you shall say you want $200, for he will give it. He will pour you a dram too, but whatever you drink and whatever you do, then do not forget to take the bridle off me, or you will never see me again," said Hans. Well, so it went. He got $200 for the horse and a dram too, which is a drink, alcohol. And then they parted. It was a close thing that he remembered to take off the bridle, but they had not come far on the way before the boy turned himself back. And when the man returned, his son, Hans, sat on the bench by the stove. Now the third day started the same way. The boy turned himself into a great black horse and said to his father there would come one offering $300 and to get him good and drunk as well, but whatever the trader did, or the father did, and however much the father drank, he could not, must not forget to take off the bridle, else he would not get away from Farmer Weatherbeard in this life. No, he would certainly not forget that, said the man. How's everyone feeling about that promise? When he came on to the mark, he got the $300, but Farmer Weatherbeard got him so drunk that he forgot to take off the bridle, of course. And so Farmer Weatherbeard went away with the horse, his son Hans. And when he'd come a distance on the way, he would go in and have some more brandy, so he set a smoldering nail barrel under the horse's nose, and a trough of oats under the tail of his horse, hung the reins on a hand rake, and went into the innkeeper. Now, I had to reread this a few times to understand what was happening, and it is important for the next event. He has basically strung the horse in such a way that a terrible smell is under his nose and the food is at his butt, and he's put him in his bridle in such a way that he can't turn around. He's kind of torturing Hans for taking off. The horse stood there tramping and kicking and whinnying and snorting. Then there came a girl in who felt sorry for it, for she had heard it from the road. "Oh, you poor thing, what manner of farmer have you? Who treats you this way?" she said, pushing the reins off the hand rake so that the horse could turn around and taste the oats. "That is me, that is," cried Farmer Weatherbeard, coming out through the door, but the horse had already shaken off the bridle and thrown itself into the goose pond and turned itself into a small fish at that very same moment. Farmer Weatherbeard went after it and turned himself into a large pike, and so Hans turned himself into a dove, and Farmer Weatherbeard turned himself into a large hawk and flew after to catch the dove. But now there stood a princess at a window of the king's farm watching this contest. "If you knew as much as I do, then you would come in through the window. To me you would," said the king's daughter to the dove. So the dove came in through the window and turned himself into Hans again and told how things stood. "Turn yourself into a gold ring and put yourself on my finger," said the king's daughter. "No, that does no good," said Hans, "for then Farmer Weatherbeard will make the king sick, and then there will be none who can make him well again before Farmer Weatherbeard comes to make him so, and for that he will demand the ring." "I shall say I have it after my mother, and that I certainly will not part with it," said the king's daughter. So Hans turned himself into a gold ring and put himself on the king's daughter's finger. There could Farmer Weatherbeard not get at him, but then it went as the boy had said it would. The king felt terribly ill, and there was no doctor who could heal him before Farmer Weatherbeard came, and he wanted the king's daughter's ring for it. So the king sent to his daughter for her ring, but she did not want to part with it, she said, for she had it after her mother. When the king heard this, he was sorry, and said that he would have the ring no matter whom she had it after. Well, it does no good that you are sorry, said the king's daughter. I cannot get it off me. If you want the ring, you'll have to take the finger, too. I shall help, and the ring will come off, said Farmer Weatherbeard. No, thank you, I shall try myself, said the king's daughter, and she rushed off to the hearth, but she put ash on it. And then the ring came off, but was immediately lost among those pale piles of ashes. Farmer Weatherbeard turned himself then into a cock, which he scratched and kicked for the ring in the chimney's dust. And so ash flew about their ears, but Hans then, clever Hans, turned himself into a fox and bit the cock's head off. And if there was any evil in Farmer Weatherbeard, then it is done for him now. And that is Farmer Weatherbeard, our first story. It is a very full story. It reads like basically 3 different folk tales in one, honestly. But if you do remember the sword and the stone, you can see where that came from. Pretty much the ending sequence there, where he turns into a fish and a dove and so on, and is chased around by that's a great scene in Sword in the Stone. If you haven't seen it in a while, I definitely recommend you watch it. It is animation itself, of course, is wonderful. Say what you will, but Disney, they know how to animate a movie. But the actual scenario has just as much life as the story, frankly. GS says, ha ha ha, great revenge. Okay. Let's get a little bit of water going here. Now, our next story is not nearly as long as that one, but it is still a full story. Just a reminder about my sort of warning on this story. It concerns a woman. If you don't want spoilers, I don't know, mute for like 30 seconds or skip ahead or something, but I'm not going to give the whole story away, but the premise is it's a woman who is a mother and a wife, and is kind of abandoned by everybody on an island alone in the sea. And it's a highly interpretive story, I will say, and I say that with affection. I say that as a positive thing. I like the oddity of it. It's not a story with an obvious moral, frankly. It's just a kind of, I don't know, it's just an engrossing, emotional kind of tale. So this story is called The Merman's Son. And it comes from a collection from the collected works of Asbjornsen and Moe as translated by Simon Roy Hughes, a translator you can support at his Patreon in the pinned comment down below. It is a tragic tale of motherhood. There was once upon a time a poor parish ward who married a stranger who had come wandering to the village, and she moved with him to a sheer home far from land. Home is like a little rocky island. There he had an earthen cabin and a boathouse and a mooring place. There were no other people than these two on the home. But the girl was content, and she skipped and sang and considered herself quite fortunate, living the Lord's happy days in her new home. Her husband was both handsome and easy to get along with, and when he left her to go fishing, She had the host of birds of many sorts for company, though many times he was gone for 2 or more days, without her having any idea where he went. Now birds have in their blood the urge to be on the move, and as the summer waned, more and more took wing, and flew south. And so the home became emptier and emptier with every flock that left. Before the year was done, she had a beautiful little boy laying in a cradle, kicking and laughing for her. He had no wings like those of the migratory birds, and thus she could keep him both summer and winter. Time no longer passed by so slowly when her husband was away fishing. As they sat by the mooring place one day when the boy was a year old, the man said that he had to travel and that it was uncertain when he would return. But she need not worry for what she and the boy would live off while she was away. The sea would bring it, as surely as she would remain faithful to him and carry him in her thoughts, both early and late. Also, I just realized I said this came from Asbjornsen and Mo. Came from Regine Normann. I will update that in the comment below. It's a terrible mistake to have made. She burst into tears and begged and pleaded with him not to leave her, and how they would fare should the child grow sick. There was not one person she could go to for help on that tiny little island. And he had to remember, father as he was, that the home lay some leagues from land. He did not contradict her. He merely embraced his wife and child in a kind of final farewell, jumped into his boat, and pushed off from land. She sat behind on the shore and gazed at him until the boat disappeared into the sheen of the evening sun. And then she took the boy on her arm and carried him into the earthen cabin and locked the door with the bolts. When she came down to the boathouse the next morning, an ironclad chest had drifted ashore. It was full of the most beautiful clothes for her and the boy, and when she had unpacked them, she saw that they were the color of the sea when it lies as smooth as a mirror and captures the glow of the evening sun. They turned blue and gold and purple if she so much as touched them. Every day after, the sea washed a new gift ashore. Here a precious piece of jewelry, there an expensive object with which to ornament the earthen cabin. It brought food and baskets full of the most delicious fruit, an abundance of playthings for the little boy. However, time passed by slowly for she who looked after the child. Her heart was bleeding with longing for he who sent her all these wonders. One night, a couple of years after her husband had traveled from her, there was a terrible storm in the high seas. So she got out of bed and pushed the shutters from the windows and stood gazing at the sea, which broke over the home so that the spray reached up to the heavens. Imagine if he whom she loved were out there in the fearful weather, on his way home. His boat would be smashed to pieces soon. As he approached land, there was not one person there to reach him a helping hand. And so quickly she put on her storm clothes, packed the blankets well around the boy so that he would not freeze while she was gone, and stole out of the earthen cabin. The wind strove and tore at her, And it was with great care and effort that she, bent doubled, won her way down to the mooring place. But there was nothing to see but restless sea. Wherever she turned, there was neither boat nor ship to see, and yet just by the tide mark, close to where she stood, lay a weather-beaten fulmar, flapping one wing. Basically a seagull, if you don't know what that is. The other wing hung broken, dragging in the sand. So carefully she took hold of the heavy bird in both hands and carried it up to the earthen cabin. It didn't peck or spit, but lay mournfully still. Staring at her with rapid blinks of its blue-black eyes as she tended its sore wing, and with a skilled hand swept the wet sand off the feathered form. Afterwards she laid the fulmar on the foot end of her bed, soft and warm, stole her clothes off, and crept into bed. She fell asleep quickly, and dreamed that the door opened to admit her husband. He strode over to the bed where she lay, and with a careful hand stroked the boy's hair and the bird's disheveled feathers. But he would not touch her. She awoke at the click of the door latch and rose from her bed, but the door was closed, bolted from the inside, and as she made sure of that before she went to bed. Then it was she realized that she had merely dreamed of her husband, that she had not seen him in flesh and blood. The broken wing of the fulmar healed quickly, but the bird, usually the most timorous of all the birds, and nearly impossible for a living person to approach, behaved more tamely than a hen, following the boy wherever he went or stood. What was even stranger was one day when she saw the boy and the bird sitting together talking. A flock of other birds had gathered around the two, chattering and cackling that it could be heard from all over the home. His mother was glad that he enjoyed having the birds as playmates. They meant him no harm, and she gained more peace for herself to think about he whom she longed to be with all the livelong day. If he did not come soon, she would perish with longing for him. One evening, though, when she came down to the mooring place, she saw the boy was astride the fulmar, out over the depths, and was genuinely frightened. She called him into land and shook him roughly. "You could have drowned, you boisterous rascal," she scolded. "And what then would I tell your father when he comes asking why I haven't looked after you better?" "Oh, father knows that I ride his horse. He's taught me himself. And tomorrow I may have my own horse, and may go with father to his castle. It is beautiful there, father says. I shall be king when I'm bigger. Father shall give me the power to turn myself into bird and fish." "What are you talking about?" cried his mother. "Does your father have a castle, and have fulmars become riding horses now? My dear little creature, you are full of nonsense, from playing with silly migratory birds that travel from place to place and gossip about everything and nothing. Come now and stay with your mother. Spare me further grief. No more riding out over the depths of the sea on that terrible bird. Fie, I don't want to see it any more." She grabbed a stone and hurled it after the fulmar, then took the boy with her, put him to bed early, and gave him food in bed. It was clear that she must better look after the boy and cease thinking of his father the whole time. When she opened the door the following morning, there sat not one, but two fulmars on the threshold. She remembered at once that the boy had said about the riding horse his father would send him, and began to shoo the birds away with the broom. They flew and sat on the cliff behind the earthen cabin, and screeched with joy when the boy showed himself in the doorway. He answered them with a strange, sharp scream his mother had never heard before from his mouth. but he was not allowed to go near them. His mother took him by the hand and led him to his most beautiful playthings and asked him to play with them out in the sunshine. She sat on the doorstep to keep watch, but as she sat there, she fell asleep. And as soon as the boy noticed he was free of his mother's watch, he ran down to the water, and the Falmars followed. And when his mother awoke from her nap and went down to get him, she arrived just in time to see both birds fluttering away from land. On one sat a tall man with a golden crown on his head, and the blue velvet cloak he wore flapped behind him in the wake. And on the other sat a little boy in gleaming silver armor with a white feather plume on his helmet. She recognized them both and called to them by name, asking them to please take her with them. But they continued to ride out across the sea on their strange horses. They did not even turn to look in her direction. Heavy days followed for her, left on the home with no company but her grief and yearning. It did not surprise her that her husband was a powerful king. He could not have been any braver or more handsome than ever he had been. But she had not expected him to reward her faithfulness by taking the boy from her. She took her son's most beautiful playthings and finest clothes, placed them in the iron-clad chest, and pushed it out to sea. If his father had the power to cause it to drift shore on the home, then he also had the power to cause it to drift to wherever he and the boy now were. And her little treasure would see that his mother had not forgotten him. One day, as she lay up on the steep rocks behind the earthen cabin, thinking she would perish of yearning for her husband and child, she thought she clearly heard her boy chuckling and laughing, as he used to do when he was in a good mood. In a kind of daze, she rose and looked around, but the boy was not there. Instead, the rocks were full of birds, as always, and they all stared at her, but she found no more comfort in their company, for they reminded her far too much of the boy and his games with them. Then a Falmar screeched the sharp cry she knew so well, and she plowed through the flock of birds and ran to where the cry came from. Close to land sat her boy astride his strange riding horse. "Father is the king of the merfolk, and I have with me a bird skin for you. Put it on quickly so that you may too come with me to him," he cried. She need not be bidden twice. She pulled on the bird skin and flew as a beautiful blue cormorant beside the Falmar. The sun dipped, and the night lit the stars on the dark heavenly ceiling, and she saw the stars reflected on the sea, but they did not gleam like the sea fire which glowed and burned in the foaming crests that rolled around the breast of the Falmar on which her son rode. All night he rode, and when day returned, they came to a wall of dense fog. "Behind this fog is my father's castle, but if you regret that you have taken the bird skin, I will return with you to the home and wrest the skin off you." "I want to be where you and he are," his mother answered, and she followed her son into the fog. But every midsummer's night, a blue cormorant walks up the sea road on the home. It goes around the derelict earthen cabin and sits on the steep rocks. It stretches itself and flaps its wings facing the sun. It is the wife who cannot rid herself of the memories of the time when she was a human and lived on that home. So, I've been thinking about this story since I read it. And, I can take it literally. If I take it pretty literally, I think maybe it's got its source in some pagan religious traditions, because it sounds like the story of a goddess or something. If I, on the other hand, take this story to be a bit more metaphorical. It's grim. One is that her husband dies and then her son dies. And this is sort of a metaphor about her spirit seeking after them, but still missing her time. The other is that just sort of a kind of madness takes her. I don't know what it is. I think there's also cheerful interpretations of it. I don't think there's definitive interpretations of it, but it is truly one of the most beautiful stories I've ever read. I'm going to link in the comment below. I just found out today, actually, it's been staring me in the face and I just didn't register what it was. A book that is a collection of translations from Regine Normann that I believe Simon Roy Hughes has done. I'm going to link you that because her stories are all this good, frankly. And Simon is absolutely correct in that she deserves to be read wider. And that's why I said it's particularly tragic that I just got my thoughts confused and credited Asbjornsen and Moe's collection with that. That wasn't. That was Regine Normann. With that said, if everyone's not too bummed out, we have some Translator's Notes. Translator's Notes. GS says, or that boys would grow up and go out into the world. Yeah, that's true as well. That, like, maybe the father dies and that the boy moves on, and it's sort of... Because there's this empty nest imagery, and I think it is important that the person who is telling this story, the author... It is, again, a piece of folklore. Regine Normann used to hear travelers come to her farm and tell stories. That's apparently where she got it from. But she was, I believe, a mother. So, you know, this could be her way of taking that story and sort of framing the literal empty nest feeling. But it's rich in that it supports a lot of views, and none of them really sort of violate its just so immersive emotional core. Yeah. This section of the show is called Translator's Notes because we are reading occasionally, or often anyways, stuff from contemporary translators, people that I talk to directly. They do sometimes send comments, usually on the YouTube videos, and I want to read them out so that everybody gets a chance to see them, because I know you don't necessarily go back to the old videos. Tonight's Translator's Notes come from Jürgen Hubert, who does our German folklore stories, which we very often read from, called Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles, which is also a Patreon. I won't link that one here today. Well, Simon's stories are the star here, but you can easily find that on my other videos. But I'm going to read you comments from his video about squeezing and crushing spirits, which was the video from last week, which if you haven't checked out, you know, consider it. It's a pretty interesting topic, but it's was a hard sell for YouTube, I guess. I leave the Translator's Notes screen up so it's clear that these words that are going to follow are not my own, and I will be taking credit for them. So these are Jürgen Hubert's comments on the Squeezing and Crushing Spirits video. Awesome story of Frau Gauden. This is indeed how old folklore should be appreciated. Now, just for me to add some context, very quickly. If you didn't watch it last week, after the stories, I told, per his request, a brief summary of how I had involved Frau Gauden into a Christmas D&D game that I did. We didn't actually read any Frau Gauden stories, but you can hear them in the video from early December called It's Not Christmas Until Odin Raids the Countryside. Carrying on with Jürgen. Some further thoughts. Squeezing and crushing people does seem to be the most common supernatural power in German folklore. It's also notable that spirits can and often do make themselves really heavy when they are dragged off by an exorcist. We haven't done any exorcist stories, but we will. Apart from the medical explanations, I had offered an explanation that it sounded a lot like heart attacks. a lot of these tales do seem to take place when people return home after spending time at the pub. I was attacked by a random spirit is often a good explanation for why someone was late. Jurgen may have a point there. I'll finish and I'll add on to that. The apprenticeship journeyman system still survives in Germany in some altered form, although few journeymen do the whole traveling to different masters thing. But a few still uphold the tradition, and you see them on the road with their traditional customs from time to time. That is so cool. I would love to see something remotely cultural like that in my life. I tried to find the... Oh, let me remind myself of the pronunciation here. The Proctgestion alley when I did a vacation in the Harz Mountains last year, but the local head of the city archives explained to me it and the houses surrounding it were demolished for being a hotbed of poverty when the new train station was constructed in the early 20th century. I also had the opportunity to visit the Church of Altenau during the same vacation. It's one thing to read about those stories, but quite another to visit the places where they allegedly happened. I agree. Trude is an alternate spelling for the better-known Druid. Originally, I changed the spelling in the translation to the modern form, but later on reconsidered and decided to let the spelling in these old tales stand as it was. I do appreciate that, Jurgen. I've since found multiple accounts of such pressure spirits who feel compelled to squeeze people akin to an addiction. Sometimes they can be cured, and we saw one of those tales in that video. Some supernatural spirits do claim that they are Christians, but for the most, their relationship with Christianity is at best ambivalent. And that is a reference to the fact that I found it kind of surprising that one of the pressure spirits became Christian and was redeemed, because spirits of the forest or whatever else were usually sort of hangovers from the pagan tradition and were always seen as like, maybe they're not that bad, but they still can't be redeemed. And so it was kind of surprising to see that. I wanted to add about the why do people tell these stories about walking home from the pub. One thing that stood out for me was the person who walked home from the pub, and there's in the story you could still see the marks of the hands on his back. And I was like, yeah, well, there's another reason why you get strange marks and hands on your back. You know, that you might need to make up a tale for the wife. I do wonder, frankly, how much folklore is men hiding for their philandering, for their drunkenness, or for being late for work. Is storytelling as a tradition, men making excuses? Anyways, thank you very much again, Jurgen, for your kind comments and for doing the translations in the first place. That's all I have to say tonight. I really appreciate anybody who came by and gave me a shot. If you did enjoy it, kindest things you can do here is to give me a like and to consider subscribing. Those things really help what is a small channel doing a niche thing. If you really loved it and you want to help me out with some of the tech costs and stuff this entails, I have a little buy me a coffee link in the description below. You don't have to, but I certainly appreciate people who do. Beyond that, I'll be back next week with some sort of stories. We'll see what I dig up and what I find interesting. Until then, I'll keep the fire warm. You have yourself a very good sleep.